When a car dies, it usually dies. That's how car production works, unless you're the MG B. In their darkest hour, British Leyland essentially gave up on its sports cars, killing off both MGs and Triumphs at the turn of the 1980s. While some manufacturers tentatively kept their fingers in the sports car pie, it's generally considered to have been replaced by the hot hatch. That was until 1989, when Mazda brought us the MX-5 and cue a whirlwind of new two-seat sports cars. And after 12 years away, Rover brought the MG B back from the dead. So today on TwinCam, this is the MGR V8. Before we get into it though, this car is to be auctioned by Manor Park Classics. So if you'd like some lovely V8 burbliness in your life, then please do follow the link in the description. But without further ado, what on earth was a car from 1962 doing in 1992? Well, I'm sure you're all familiar with the MG B. Until the MX-5 eventually overtook it, this thing was the most successful sports car of all time, combining tail-happy handling and a gutsy B-Series engine with genuine everyday usability. That sounds like a silly point to make, but in the 1950s, sports cars were only really used as second cars. Believe it or not, the B debuted external door handles and locks as two of its key features. It was also far more refined than the old MGA, and over 18 years of production proved itself to be an evergreen. In fact, the B's biggest problem wasn't the passage of time, but the company that built it. Even the Nissan S30 and the US government's best efforts couldn't kill it off, maintaining its chokehold over the market in a way nobody could have expected, none more so than British Leyland themselves. Sports cars are probably the thing that BL did best. With MG, Triumph and Jaguar at their disposal, they had three of the best names in the business, accounting for a monopoly on the segment in both the UK and the United States, the latter of which was their best export market, but one that almost exclusively took the sports cars. Therefore, despite their slide towards bankruptcy, a new sports car was a necessity. But this time, MG and Triumph would have to work together. The project was very much an MG B replacement, but market research showed that Triumph had the stronger brand, so the new car debuted in 1974 as the Triumph TR7. The reasons behind that name appearing on a car that wasn't a TR6 replacement deserves a video of its own. But the MG B was by now an old car, and thanks to a lack of effort on BL's part, was saddled with dreadfully ugly plastic bumpers, a ride height that made its handling a disgrace, and in the US, an emission-straddled engine that was running out of puff. Yet, in spite of all this, it kept being produced and it remained hugely popular. This was a problem for BL, who had bet everything on the TR7, which as 1980 rolled around, hadn't found the market BL had expected of it. Their new chairman, Sir Michael Edwards, welcomed an era of rationalisation, and the sports cars were marked for execution. MG's Abingdon plant was closed in 1980, followed by the TR7 the year after. But this isn't to say that they completely abandoned the idea. While the Triumph name would be sent out to pasture, within 18 months, the famous Octagon was back on the front of a production car. Going back to its roots, MG would present hot versions of the Metro, Maestro and Montego, the former of which especially was massively successful, but despite the good publicity, a roadster still wasn't forthcoming. We were lucky enough to meet the MG EXE concept car in 1985, and behind the scenes they worked on a new front-drive MG Midget, but neither of these saw production. It seems that the newly christened Rover Group was caught completely unaware when, in 1989, Mazda brought us the ultimate tribute act. In fact, Hiroshima used old Triumphs and MGs as references for their work, and the MX-5's success caused a complete upheaval. It's difficult to overstate just how important Mazda was to the sports car market, because they almost single-handedly brought it back from the dead. The MX-5 opened the door for the likes of the new Alfa Spider, of the Fiat Barchetta, the Mercedes SLK, the BMW Z3, and even the Honda S2000. While cars like the Toyota MR2 and Lotus Elan did already exist, they weren't treated like the second coming in the same way as the MX-5 was. And as a result, Rover knew they had a battle on their hands. Despite the concepts, BL physically couldn't have built a sports car in the 1980s. When the MG B was originally killed off, they were hours from closing their doors altogether, and through that decade were far more preoccupied with survival and later privatisation. But that all changed at the turn of the 90s. Rover was now a part of British aerospace, and they were riding a wave of newfound success thanks to the new 200 and re-engineered Metro, both of which were regarded as the best cars in their class. Through cars like these, they were also trying to move up market, and in this environment, a sports car wasn't just feasible, but desirable. In 1990, Rover committed to designing a new mid-engine rear-drive roadster, the car we came to know as the MGF. The problem was that it was still 5 years away, and they were hungry to eat up the attention that cars like this were now receiving. So they needed a stopgap, and bringing back the MG B was just what they needed. From a 2023 perspective, it sounds utterly bonkers to have done this, but safety legislation and perception was next to zero, so as long as they could meet emissions regs, there was nothing stopping them. But the new MG was far more than just a reproduction, so the RV8 more than deserves its new name. Beneath the skin, it was still by and large an MG B. It still had double wishbones and coils at the front and a live axle and leaves at the back, plus the old drum brakes on the rear. But the track became wider, the wheels and tyres fatter, and most importantly, the lever arm dampers were replaced by proper, coney, telescopic shock absorbers. Therefore, while it is still very much a car from the 60s, it is far better controlled than any MG B before. It also has a limited slip differential, which means it can deal with the power that bit better, and that is very much the point. The car, born in 1962, had 3 different engines in its first life. The original 1800cc B-Series 4-banger, followed by a big lump of 3-litre C-Series straight 6 in the MG-C, and finally the iconic 3.5-litre Rover V8. The MG B GT V8 didn't last particularly long, partly due to production capacity, but also due to the fuel crisis of the early 70s. Yet for the car's second life, Rover couldn't market the R as a true MX-5 competitor. I'm sure that's an obvious thing to say, and we'll actually get into that later on, but that means a 4-cylinder had to be off the cards. Plus, the Rover V8 remained in service under the bonnet of the Range Rover, so yesterday's affordable roadster was to become a thumping mini GT of kinds, powered by 3.9 litres worth of 8-cylinder goodness, complete with a 5-speed gearbox, fuel injection and 190 brake horsepower. It's not a heck of a lot of power, but with only 1,200 kilograms to pull around, that means 0 to 60 in 5.9 seconds in a car designed some 30 years prior. But I think there's a question to ask about all this. While it makes sense in the context of 1992, the question is why the MG B? After all, the TR7 was an objectively better car, and it was 13 years newer. But I'd wager there were 2 reasons why this wasn't the case. The first one is pretty obvious, and that's the reputation the TR7 maintained. While the MG B was never the best built of cars, the less said about the Triumph, the better. And then there's the controversy surrounding its styling, because what with its aggressively 70s wedge, I don't think many people would have liked it. This is the early 90s we're talking about, right at the dawn of the retro styling era that brought us cars like the new Beetle, the Jaguar S-Type, and from Rover themselves, the 75 and R50 Mini. In that context, I don't just think it's cool that Rover brought this car back, but just in terms of a gimmick, it was a masterstroke. There was nothing to carry the flame anymore, so Rover, wanting to bring attention back to MG, brought back their greatest hit. This is a brilliant looking car. The MG B has always been a criminally slept on shape, partly because it was so common. But if we observe it with fresh eyes, it was always a looker. Especially the GT in my opinion, but the Roadster was obviously more important, so that's the one they put back into production. Anyway, while the R still resembles the B, Rover didn't just retrofit some 90s plastics, and that brings us to my second reason why this was the car they chose to build. When Abingdon was closed in 1980, the tooling didn't just go in the bin. Instead, it was eventually repurposed by Rover's heritage division, British Motor Heritage, who then, as they still do today, began producing panels and shells for many of their classic models, the MG B being one of the favourites. This meant that Rover Special Products had an easy supply from which to work, and while the inner wings and all the body panels barring the doors and boot were modified, the basic shell was built by Heritage, then transported to Rover's Cowley plant to be painted and assembled. Yet these modifications do so much to add presence and a muscular attitude to the RV8, both inside and out. We'll start with the Festival of Wood and Leather, and I think it's a mixed bag in here. While a lot of effort has been made to pull away from the austerity of an original MG B, it's a bit too much of a parts bin special. The wood and leather are high quality and look fantastic, but the steering wheel looks a bit of an afterthought and the Metro vents are a bit of a joke. Regardless, this interior feels special for 1992. It feels alternative and paints such a contrast to many of the mainstream cars on offer at the time. But what I'm in no doubt of is the beauty of this thing. Not only is it all smoothed out thanks to new bumpers and trim, but take the new lamp clusters on the fins, the more flowing front end and then the haunches and pinching added to the side profile. This is what makes this car muscular in a way the old one never was. While I think the front end is a little fussy, that side profile with those split rims is something to behold. For me, it's the perfect tribute act as opposed to a tired reboot, fundamentally changing the car's character from affordable sports car to curious, history-laden GT. But that's exactly what this was, a history lesson. Rover could never have expected them to go up against an MX-5 or an MR2 because of their dynamics, their attitude, and most importantly, the price. All the fancy materials and the way in which these cars were built made them exceptionally expensive, all the way up around the same price as a TVR, which was quicker and better to drive. So, as a result, it won't surprise you to hear that over 3 years of production, they made only 1,983 RV8s. But the fact that this was a showcase and something of an entertaining interlude is showcased by where they went. Only 330 of them stayed in the UK, with 1,579 of them going to Japan, where just as with the Mini, they had a bit of a love affair with one of Rover's brand new classic cars. And on that note, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.